Success Through Stillness by Simmons with Chris Morrow, Part 4. Living Up to Your Potential. Chapter 10. The Power of the Present. Not long ago, I was at a party talking to a famous fashion designer when the conversation turned to how I dealt with the stress of overseeing so many businesses, running several charities, having a personal life, and of course, being a father. "Russell, I hear the way you stay sane is meditation," he said. "So tell me, what's the number one benefit you get from it?" "Oh, that's easy," I said with a big smile. "It helps me stay awake during the day." The second I said that, I could tell the guy was confused. Did I mean I have narcolepsy? That if it wasn't for meditation, I would be falling asleep at my desk and nodding off during meetings? We got interrupted before I got a chance to explain myself that night, but now I want to clarify what I meant. When I said I wanted to be awake during the day, I wasn't talking about being physically tired. If that were my problem, I could just drink coffee, which I rarely, if ever, do, or an energy drink, or try some of the less legal forms of stimulation I used back in the day. No, I was talking about being present. You see, we're all physically awake during the day. Not so many of us, however, are present. And presence is the source that everything positive, creative, happy, beautiful, and loving in your life is going to flow from. When I speak of being present, I mean being truly connected to the moment, where the distractions and noise of the world fade away and your mind is in the now, instead of the past or the future. I realize that when I use terms like the moment or in the now, it might sound a little new agey to some of you. "Oh, Russell's going off on his Zen stuff right now," you might be thinking. But there's really nothing at all exotic or mystical about being present. It's actually a state that we're all familiar with, that we all experience, hopefully, on a daily basis. For example, at the very moment you laugh at a funny joke, that's being present. Becoming transfixed as you watch your favorite football team score a touchdown to win the game is being present too. As is getting so into a book that you almost forget to breathe. We're all familiar with that sensation, even if we don't think of it as being present. We all know what it's like to become so completely immersed in an activity that the distractions of life that usually seem so loud can barely be heard anymore. Because when you're watching your team score that touchdown, you're not thinking about the report you've got to hand in at work next week. Just as when you're turning those pages in a great thriller, you're not thinking about the bills you've got to pay. You're just enjoying the moment. Take dancing. Why are some people great dancers and other people just can't seem to catch a beat? We like to joke that Black folk are naturally funky and that white people don't know how to move, but of course that's all BS. I've seen plenty of white guys get all the way down on the dance floor, just as I've seen plenty of brothers who can't dance to save their lives. What makes a great dancer isn't background or skin color, it's being present. When someone is really moving to a song, they're completely connected to the music. They're not worried about what other people in the club are thinking about them. They're just reacting to the notes of the music that they hear. And if they're really plugged in, then they start moving between the notes. If you've ever watched a really great dancer, then you know what I'm talking about. Not only are they moving perfectly in sync with the bass lines, the drums, and the guitars, but they also seem to be moving to the notes in the spaces between those sounds. When Michael Jackson would do his signature kick, it wasn't to the beat, it was between the beats. That's how connected he was to the music. When he was dancing, he was completely present. Now, imagine if you could move through life being as connected as Michael Jackson was when he was dancing, or as connected as you feel when you're laughing at an incredible comedian like Chris Rock. It doesn't have to be something you only dream of doing. All of us possess that presence in our hearts. We all have the ability to be as present as MJ when he was dancing, as Michael Jordan when he was playing basketball, or as Chris Rock is when he's up on stage telling a joke. We all have that inside of us. It's just that we're often too distracted by the noise of the world to realize it. But when the distractions of the world fade away, you can take those seconds of presence you feel laughing at a joke or hearing your favorite song and extend them so that you don't just feel that way every once in a while, but can actually move through life feeling connected and present. To help you accept this truth, in this section, I'm going to break down all the ways that meditation will help you become the best possible you and live up to your full potential as a human being. But I also realize that many of you also probably came to these pages because you'd like to replicate some of the success I've had in the business world. So while I'll discuss the many ways that meditation will make you more balanced and compassionate, as well as less judgmental, I'll also highlight how those qualities will actually make you a better business person too. Chapter 11, Finding Your Focus. As you've already seen, there are a lot of reasons to meditate. But whenever I'm trying to give someone who's on the fence about meditation a very practical reason to do it, I usually tell them this. Meditation is going to let you accomplish twice as much while only putting in half the effort. Think about that. Imagine if day in and day out, you were able to be twice as productive as your coworkers. If every day you read twice as many reports as the guy in the cubicle next to you, taught twice as much material as the other teachers, or washed twice as many dishes as the other guys in your kitchen, how long would it be before you got promoted in that office, in that school, or in that restaurant? Not long at all. I can tell you that if someone in my office suddenly started doing twice as much work in half the normal time, I would notice that transformation and reward it too. So if being more focused and productive is something that sounds attractive to you, then consider the studies that have proved people who meditate are able to hold their attention on task much longer than those who don't. For instance, recently, the University of California, Santa Barbara conducted a study on how meditation affects test-taking ability, which requires tremendous focus. In the study, a group of college students were asked to take the GRE, the Graduate Record Examination. Then, the students were split into two groups. One group took an intensive meditation class, the other an intensive class on nutrition. After 2 weeks of class, each group was asked to take the GRE again. The group that studied nutrition didn't show any improvement, but the group that had meditated saw their average GRE verbal score go from 460 to 520. The meditation group also showed improvement on tests they were given on memory and focus. If you've ever studied for the GRE or the SAT, then you know jumping up 60 points is a big deal. The kind of improvement that people often spend thousands of dollars on tutoring or classes to hopefully achieve. Similarly, researchers from George Mason University and the University of Illinois recently conducted a study to find out if meditation could help college students increase their focus and retain more information from their lectures. The researchers found that students who meditated before their lecture scored better on a quiz that followed the lecture than those who didn't. Data from this study suggests that meditation may help students who might have trouble paying attention or focusing, said one of the researchers, Professor Robert Simmons of George Mason. Another study, entitled Intensive Meditation Training Improves Perceptual Discrimination and Sustained Attention, was also recently published in Psychological Science and described similar findings. In this study, researchers tested two groups, one that had been taught meditation, one that hadn't, on their ability to focus on a task that required them to distinguish small differences between things they saw. Not surprisingly, the group that meditated scored much better on the test. According to the researchers, this improvement in focus persisted 5 months after the retreat, particularly for people who continue to meditate every day. And it's not only scientists claiming that meditation improves your focus. Many business leaders have come to the same conclusion. Business Insider magazine recently included me in an article entitled 14 Executives Who Swear by Meditation. And in reading it, I noticed that the two words all these business leaders kept mentioning were focus and clarity. Robert Stiller, who founded Green Mountain Coffee, said, if you have a meditation practice, you can be much more effective in a meeting. Meditation helps develop your abilities to focus better and to accomplish your task. And Steve Rubin, who used to run United Fuels International, said that thanks to meditation, he has the mental clarity and alertness for both laser-like focus on the details as well as broad comprehension. Side note, I really believe that in the not-so-distant future, we're going to see more and more companies making meditation part of their official corporate culture. Someone who's always out in front of the trends is my good friend, Ariana Huffington, who recently started offering meditation classes to her employees at the Huffington Post and AOL. Why did she do it? Stress reduction and mindfulness just don't make us happier and healthier. They're a proven competitive advantage for any business that wants one, she explained. While most businesses, or at least the successful ones, are always looking for a competitive advantage, so expect more CEOs to be following Ariana's lead, as they often do. Returning. Many of the executives also spoke of how meditation helped them make better decisions. Roger Brokowitz, the CEO of Legal Seafoods, said, "Sometimes I'm wrestling with an issue before meditation, and afterward, the answer is suddenly clear." And Romani Ayer, former chairman and CEO of the Hartford, a financial services company, noted, "Importantly, it has helped me to make clearer, more effective decisions on the job." I've had a similar experience in my own career, where I found that when I'm focused, I can look at a seemingly complex situation and instead of feeling overwhelmed by it, be able to see it clearly, which in turn lets me make a decision that usually ends up being the right one. For example, I remember once Rushcard didn't make any profits just 1 year after it made 15 million in profit. The brand was just flat. But people tried to convince me that it had flatlined. From my friends to my accountants to my senior executives, everyone was trying to convince me to pull the plug on the card. It was true that it had undergone a big shift, but I didn't let myself get distracted by all the anxiety I was hearing. Instead, I took a very clear-eyed, unemotional look at the situation and decided that the company wasn't dead. It had just reached a stage where it needed to evolve. So while everyone was yelling for me to pull the plug, I actually put even more money into the company. Instead of tearing it apart, I reinvested in its core and gave it new life, and it worked. The next year, we were back to making a profit, and all those naysayers tried to act like they had never called for me to abandon ship. But without the focus and calmness that I've developed through meditation, I would have never been able to look past all that anxiety and see the potential of the rush cards still had. As the Christian yogi Yogananda once wrote, "All successful men and women devote much time to deep concentration. They are able to dive deeply within their minds and to find the pearls of right solutions for the problems that confront them." I also find it very telling that the only book Steve Jobs ever downloaded on his iPad was Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, the yogi I just quoted. In fact, in his best-selling biography of Jobs, Walter Isaacson wrote that Autobiography of a Yogi was the guide to meditation and spirituality that he had first read as a teenager, then reread in India, and had read once a year ever since. No entrepreneur ever did more with technology to bring people together than Steve Jobs. Yet what book did he make a point of rereading every year? A book about stillness and meditation. The beautiful thing about meditation is that when you're consistent with your practice, those pearls don't come to you just while you're meditating. Instead, as you practice, you'll find that they begin to appear over the course of your day. It can be very subtle too. You won't necessarily be sitting down and thinking very hard about whether to take a new job or commit to a certain relationship. Instead, you can be just driving in your car or making dinner, and you will hear a soft voice telling you the answer to whatever question has been troubling you. It might say, "Yes, it's true that job will pay you more, but you don't feel good about that company. You don't like the product, and the guy who would be your boss made you feel uncomfortable. Say no." And when you hear that voice, you'll know that you found your pearl. Even though the thought of turning it down might have made you anxious, suppose I never get offered a job that pays as much again. What if I say no and then get fired from my current job in 6 months? That calm, focused voice that said no spoke with more authority than the anxiety. That's how you know that saying no is the right decision. As Yogananda said, being able to access deep concentration and focus has always been a skill of successful people, but it's become even more of a necessity in the internet age. Don't get me wrong, I love so many things about the internet and social media. In many ways, The strengths of the internet and of new technology are similar to some of the strengths of meditation. They help bring people together and remind us all the things we share in common. The main reason I run a website called globalgrind.com, globalgrind.com, is that I firmly believe that the internet will help young people overcome the cultural barriers that have held back previous generations. There can be a healthy relationship between the stillness inside of us and the technology that connects us with others, but only if we really work at cultivating that stillness. Otherwise, the technology is so omnipresent that it will drown out that stillness and focus. While it's amazing that you can get on Twitter and find out about a mass demonstration in Egypt as it's happening, it can also be extremely distracting to keep looking at pictures of what your friends just ate or read about what just happened on a reality show. A lot of the information we get on social media is nothing but noise, a constant buzz that just dilutes our focus. And if I'm being honest, I'm guilty of this myself. Even though I definitely feel that many of my tweets and the messages I post to Facebook contain information that's going to help bring people together, I put a lot of noise out there too. The problem is listening to that noise can become very addictive. How many times have you been working on an idea and just when you come to a difficult point, you suddenly get an urge to check your email or log onto Facebook? Instead of maintaining your focus and working through whatever problem you've encountered, you give yourself over to the welcome diversion of your cell phone. I see this in social situations all the time too. Have you ever looked around a party and thought it seemed like half the people were staring at their cell phones or even standing on the dance floor and looking at their phones? You know they're not really responding to an urgent email. Instead, like most of us can, they're feeling a little shy or awkward in a social environment. Yet instead of getting past that awkwardness or walking over and introducing themselves to a stranger and starting up a conversation, or even just dancing by themselves, they're taking refuge in the distraction their cell phones provide. But getting past that awkwardness and shyness and striking up a conversation with a stranger is often how you take your life to the next level. Striking up a conversation with someone you barely know might be how you meet the man who will become your husband or the person who wants to invest in your business. Or simply make a new friend. You don't make those types of connections when you're staring at your phone in the middle of a party, but you can make them when you feel at ease with yourself enough to take a chance and introduce yourself to a stranger. That's the type of ease and confidence that meditation promotes. Chapter 12, the heaviness of success and failure. Being more focused isn't the only way meditation is going to help you in your career. On a philosophical level, it's going to allow you to get past the misconception that trips up so many of us, that our lives are defined by our successes and failures. If you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, then you already know that one of my favorite quotes is from the Hindu holy book, the Bhagavad Gita, is, "You have control over your work alone, never the fruit." There are a lot of different ways you could interpret that passage, but to me, it's always meant, stop worrying about how much money you make off your work, the fruit, and instead, just stay focused on your work itself. Because when you embrace the process of your work, instead of focusing on the results, you'll always be happier, plus do a much better job. Of course, that's easier said than done in a culture that puts so much emphasis on the success, the fruit, and failure, the absence of fruit, but not nearly enough on the actual process of making that fruit. This is where meditation can be extremely helpful. When you take those 20 minutes and allow yourself to calm down and shut out the distractions, you'll find that it becomes much easier and easier to see that your true happiness lies in the process, not the results. When I meditate, I can see that what makes me happy isn't getting a fat check or buying a new toy, but coming up with creative ways I can help other people realize their dreams. That might seem a bit corny, but it's true. And it's always been that way for me. I got into hip hop because I wanted to help other people experience the joy I felt the first time I heard someone rap. I wanted to help rappers reach new audiences, and I wanted to help people who might not otherwise hear about it come to the music. My career in music was always about helping other people share their gift. When I was working with Run DMC or LL Cool J or Public Enemy, I woke up every morning focused on how I could help them reach more people and share more of their gift. If I've ever stumbled in my career, it's only been in those moments where I've lost sight of this truth and become more focused on the results. When I've become more focused on what a company is worth than whether or not I actually enjoy working on it. Meditating helps remind me every day to re-embrace the process. So if I love working on new designs for a fashion label, getting the opportunity to do that will be enough for me. Whether those clothes are flying off the shelves or barely moving, I'm going to be okay. Because I know if I stay focused on the process of making the clothes that I love, eventually other people are going to pick up on that passion and embrace it. Meditation also helps you get past the anxiety that always accompanies wins and losses. People don't like to hear this, but the truth is that losses and failure are actually very important parts of the process of becoming good at whatever it is you do. To use Steve Jobs as an example again, today we think of him as one of the greatest success stories of all time, as the man who made Apple one of the most admired brands in the world. And while there's no doubt he deserves that legacy, he wasn't always viewed as a success. Yes, he's experienced tremendous success after he initially helped start Apple, but he also very publicly got booted out of a company a few years later. After that, in the eyes of the tech world, he was a failure, a guy who had a shot and blew it. That sense of having failed would have discouraged a lot of people, but Steve never gave up on the process. In his case, a love of inventing new ways to communicate, and eventually, he was able to make everyone forget his previous failure. In a famous speech he gave at Stanford University in 2005, Steve said that, in many ways, failing publicly was actually a blessing. It turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, he said. The heaviness of being successful was replaced with the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. And if you think about Steve's legacy, most of the things he's remembered for today, the iPod, the iPhone, and iPod, all were created after he'd been labeled a failure. Note, Steve Jobs will be remembered rightfully as one of the great innovators of his generation. We shouldn't forget that so much of his philosophy and approach was rooted in the ancient practice of meditation. This is what he told his biographer, Walter Isaacson. If you just sit and observe, you will see how restless your mind is. If you try to calm it, it only makes it worse. But over time, it does calm. And when it does, there's room to hear more subtle things. That's when your intuition starts to blossom and you start to see things more clearly and be in the present moment. Your mind just slows down and you see a tremendous expanse in the moment. You see so much more than you could see before. It's a discipline. You have to practice it. End note. I believe meditation helped him stay focused on the process and helped him throw off not only the heaviness of being successful, but the heaviness he must have felt after being called a failure. Because at its root, that heaviness is just a big ball of anxiety. I felt the weight of that heaviness too. Looking back, I used to overthink everything when it came to my business. Publicly, I played the role of someone who didn't have a care in the world. It was all about partying and having fun. But inside, forget about it. I was a mess. Every business decision I was involved in would become gut-wrenching. I still remember how I was absolutely consumed with doubt when I was first approached about selling Def Jam Records. I was being offered $40 million, a tremendous amount of money, but all I could see was fear. Day and night, I was tormented. Should I sell the company? Was it for the right price? If I waited a few more weeks, could I get a better price? Was I about to get ripped off? And once I did sell, what would I do next? It was like those questions were playing on a 24-hour-a-day loop in my mind. I could have been sitting in a club surrounded by models, which for a lot of people is a very picture of having made it. But emotionally, I was probably the most miserable person in the room. In the end, I decided not to sell, even though everyone around me thought I was insane for turning down so much money. My initial reaction to the offer was that it just wasn't the right time. And despite all the torment I put myself through, it turned out my first reaction was my best one. As is almost always the case, because just 18 months later, I got an offer for $112 million, which I did accept. And it wasn't just big decisions, like whether or not to sell the company. Getting hung up about failure used to get me bent out of shape all the time, back then, and distract me from being focused on the process. I can remember in the mid-1980s, I produced a record with an R&B group I loved called Blue Magic. They weren't young and hip like Run DMC or Public Enemy, but their music was so beautiful that I was convinced I would set the world on fire. When it came out, the album received great reviews, but only got played on the old school stations. To me, that was a great failure. I made a brand new record and already was being seen as old school. I felt dispirited, like the record had been rejected. When that happened, I should have appreciated that I had been able to put my resources toward helping something that was beautiful and reflected what was in my heart. But instead of doing that, I started feeling sorry for myself. For the first time in my career, I had promoted something that I was sure the rest of the world was going to share my passion for, but they didn't. The heaviness of that perceived failure basically stopped me from ever getting back into the studio with Blue Magic and helping them share their beauty with the world. Today, thanks to meditation, I don't get anxious about whether or not the world shares my vision right away or not. Just as I've stopped tearing myself apart over whether there's a right or wrong answer for every situation and learned to accept that inevitable ups and downs are a necessary part of my journey. If holding onto a company feels like the right thing to do, then I'm going to sell. If making records is what I feel passionate about, then I'm going to make them, whether the world immediately reacts positively to them or not. Note, I don't know if many people have done a better job at keeping an even keel over the years than Oprah. No matter what's going on around her or what's being said about her, Oprah's managed to keep a laser-like focus on her vision. So I'm not surprised at all that after meditating for the first time several years ago, Oprah had this to say. I walked away feeling fuller than when I'd come in, full of hope, a sense of contentment and deep joy, knowing for sure that even in the daily craziness that bombards us from every direction, there is still the constancy of stillness. Only from that space can you create your best work and your best life. End note. Before, I was on a roller coaster. If my stock was up, I was riding high, but if it was low, I was down in the dumps. Now I'm approaching my work from a much calmer perspective. So whether that stock goes up or it goes down, my heart rate stays the same. I won't lie, that calmness can be disconcerting to my business partners. They're used to seeing people in my position go celebrate like crazy when a project makes money and get very angry and upset when it doesn't. But if I believe in an idea, I'm going to stick with it, whether it brings back an investment at first or not. There have been many years when my business has operated in a deficit, but if the work is satisfying, then I'm excited. My accountant actually took me aside the other day and told me in a very serious tone, Russell, if you keep putting your money into all these ventures, you'll be broke in a few years. I know that was supposed to be a sobering, maybe even scary message, but any anxiety it might have created was only fleeting. Because as soon as that anxiety moved out of my mind, I remembered I'm spending my money on light, fun things, on building yoga studios, on spreading hip hop culture, on promoting artistic expressions through my TV and film companies, on promoting ethnic understanding. How could I ever stay anxious about that? If doing those things makes me go broke, then when that money comes, I'll just figure out a way to make some more money. When that moment comes, I'll just figure out a way to make some more money. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just go to India and learn how to teach yoga. If I get to that moment, I'll deal with it. But I've conditioned my mind not to get entangled in worry, even if that's what my accountant might prefer. Adopting this calm approach is why I encourage all my employees to practice meditation. One person who's taken to it right away and has really reaped the benefits is my COO, Osman Errol. When he first started working with me, Osman was so anxiety prone. No matter what issue was in front of us, he was worried about it, from whether a product was worth a multi-million-dollar investment to what color to paint the walls. Osman was always worked up. But now that Osman is meditating every day, he's calmed down a lot. Instead of getting tripped up by every scenario that passes through his mind, he's allowing his thoughts to settle before he tries to act on them. This is an especially important skill for someone like Osman, whose true gift is creativity. When you are creative and full of imagination, so many ideas are going to come into your head. And to be blunt, while some of them are going to be genius, many more will be trash. The question is, how do you stop reacting to all that trash and learn how to zero in on those ideas that have real value? The answer, of course, is meditation, which is why I encourage all my employees to spend some time in stillness each day. Think about it. Do you want an organization filled with people who stay on that emotional roller coaster, quick to break out the champagne the moment something hits, but equally quick to panic the moment they think something isn't working? Or do you want to be surrounded by people who are steady and thoughtful in their approach and take satisfaction simply from trying to do a good job? For me, it's an easy choice. Another entrepreneur who encourages his employees to meditate for this very reason is someone I mentioned earlier, Ray Dalio, the founder of one of the largest hedge funds in the world. A lot of Ray's business philosophy revolves around his employees being able to have very open conversations about issues they're facing without worrying about whether they're right or wrong. Ray believes, and I agree with him, that it's much more valuable for people to have a real exchange of information and ideas than to be surrounded by yes men who are afraid to say what they think, or even worse, will only say what they think you want them to say. In an interview with Academy of Achievement, Ray said he values having meditators around him because the practice promotes the ability to disagree without being trapped by emotion, to be able to talk about strengths and weaknesses, to separate yourself from your weakness and look at it objectively is a very powerful thing. Ray adds that while hundreds of people in his office meditate, not all of them do. But he says, you can tell a big difference between someone who didn't meditate and someone who started. And just like I saw with Osman, what Ray notices is how much more powerful those people are after they learned how to stop operating out of an anxious space. Instead of always freaking out or being anxious about getting something wrong, Ray sees they have open, thoughtful conversations to find what the true answers are. And as Ray points out, that calmness isn't just good for business. Quote, that clarity is going to be the biggest thing that can help mankind. Chapter 13, Finding Calm and Balance. I've been talking about how meditation can help you let go of the anxiety you might feel at your work or in your career, but it's important to understand that that sense of calm and being balanced will extend to all aspects of your life. Many people who practice meditation, especially those who consider themselves Buddhists, refer to achieving this balance as being in a state of equanimity. If you're not familiar with it, equanimity is defined as evenness of mind, especially under stress. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know what that word meant before I started hanging out with some Buddhists. I have, however, been aware of the state they're describing for a long time. What they call equanimity, I've always called cool. And at their essence, they really mean the same thing. Back when I was a kid, the coolest guys were movie stars like Richard Roundtree from Shaft or Ron O'Neal from Superfly. For kids today, it would probably be Jay-Z, who has that same sort of coolness, the same sense of being balanced, no matter what is happening around him. Jay might be the coolest person I've ever met, and not just because he sold millions of records and is married to Beyonce, though it sure doesn't hurt. If you've spent 5 minutes around Jay, you would see that he'd be cool with or without all that worldly success. I believe what makes Jay so unflappable is that he's able to live in the moment, in the recording studio, in the streets, in a boardroom, on stage, wherever he's at. People might be going crazy around him, snapping pictures, slapping his back, or screaming his name. But you can sense that Jay never gets caught up in it. He's always connected to and content with what's happening in his own head. Note, if you've ever read The Color Purple, then I don't have to tell you what a wonderful writer Alice Walker is. And in an article for the New York Times, she credited much of her success as a writer to the balanced meditation brought into her life. Quote, meditation has been a loyal friend to me. It has helped me write my books. I could not have written Possessing the Secret of Joy without it. Writing The Temple of My Familiar would have been impossible. The Color Purple owes much of its humor and playfulness to the equanimity of my mind, as I committed myself to a routine daily practice. End quote. And at his heart, Jay is a meditator. In his classic song, Can I Live?, which is about dealing with the valleys and peaks and expectations of both hustling in the street and being a rapper, Jay actually says his turning point came when he stepped it up another level, meditated like a Buddhist. The beautiful thing about meditation is that it allows you to access that cool guy or girl inside of you that's waiting to come out. The Jay-Z level cool that you know you possess, but always seems just out of reach. You might not be married to Beyonce or sell a million records, but when you meditate, you'll be able to access that part of you that people like to be around, the part of you that feels upbeat about things, that feels like you're moving toward your goals without frustration and anxiety. You'll be that cool guy who has it together and is able to come up with a plan when everyone else is running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Or that cool girl everyone looks up to, who everyone wants to be like, who is able to bring out the best in other people. All you have to do to be that person is to let go of the anxiety that's built up in your mind. I know that the idea of letting go of your worries might sound very difficult, but meditation makes it possible. Meditation is not going to get rid of whatever is making you anxious. If you're worried about your marriage, meditation is not going to magically fix your relationship. If you're worried about your job, meditation is not going to get you promoted. And as much as I wish it would, meditation is not going to bring back a loved one who passed away. What meditation will do, however, is teach you how not to get stuck worrying about your marriage, your job, or even losing someone close to you, as difficult as that may sound. When you meditate, you'll learn how to let your thoughts exist on their own without getting too involved in them. This is especially important when you encounter negative thoughts, which most of us do every day. Sometimes it might even seem most of the day. According to Dr. Philip Golden, who runs the clinically applied affective neuroscience laboratory at Stanford, meditation can change how you deal with those negative thoughts. In studies, Dr. Philippe has found that people's most common reaction to negative thoughts is to either push them away or obsess over them. We've all felt that way at times. If something bad seems to happen, we either don't think about it at all or spend too much time thinking about it. We either walk around in denial or walk around like there's a black cloud hovering over our head. But neither of those approaches really works. Whether we try to ignore a problem or obsess over it, the result is always the same. That anxiety only gets louder. What meditation provides is an alternate way to deal with anxiety. Meditation allows you to acknowledge what is happening in your life instead of denying it, but then keep it moving, as opposed to obsessing over it. This is the healthiest way to move through life. As Dr. Golden puts it, the goal of meditation is not to get rid of the thoughts or emotions. The goal is to become more aware of your thoughts and emotions and learn how to move through them without getting stuck. Keep in mind, this applies to not only how you deal with anxious or negative situations, but how you deal with positive ones too. Trust me, I've seen just as many people getting stuck celebrating as I've seen them getting stuck worrying. In particular, I'd seen this happen to a lot of rappers I've worked with. They'd sign a new deal or be given a gold record and then want to run out and celebrate by buying a new car or dropping $1,000 in the club, making it rain on a stripper. But after they drive that car around for a couple of days, or when they woke up the next morning after spending $10,000 in the club, they feel very empty inside. Quite a few guys would confess this to me in almost apologetic terms, as if they'd messed up. Russell, I don't know what's wrong with me, they'd say. I went out and bought me and my boys all sorts of things after I signed the deal. And then we went and shut down the club. But even after all of that, I'm just not happy. What I've always tried to explain to those artists is that the reason they're feeling out of whack is because they got way too caught up in the celebrating. If you're an artist, what truly makes you happy isn't buying new cars or popping bottles. It's making beautiful music for other people to enjoy. That's it. You're going to be your happiest when you're in the studio writing a song, not when you're out celebrating how many records that song eventually sold. So whether the emotion is a happy or sad one, in order to achieve a state of equanimity, you need to stay focused on not getting stuck on it. I'm not suggesting that you need to turn into Mr. Spock and be completely devoid of emotion. Guess I'm showing my age. But the more you learn how to use meditation to engage your emotions and then let them go, the less anxious and more free you'll feel. In some ways, I've been very fortunate when it comes to anxiety. Maybe it's the way I'm wired. Maybe it was the example of my parents. I can't really call it. But I've never really suffered from carrying a lot of worry around with me. Yes, as I mentioned, I tend to overthink business deals. But overall, I generally had an upbeat outlook. But as I've grown older, there have been situations that could have created a lot of anxiety for me. I lost both my parents, both of whom I was very close to. I got divorced. I watched my brother suffer through depression. I've lost vast amounts of money. I've had companies fail. I've been labeled out of touch and even most recently, an Uncle Tom. I've spent years and millions of dollars working on social initiatives like school reform, prison reform, drug law reform, anti-homophobia, and anti-Islamophobia, issues that all directly affect the African American community very deeply. But when my new internet network, ADD, released an admittedly poorly conceived parody about Harriet Tubman, I rightfully got taken to task on the internet. Even though I apologized and explained that I was deeply sorry for not being sensitive to the underlying implications of the video, people really let me have it. It was very difficult for me to know that I had offended, hurt, and disappointed so many people. Because of this, it could have been very easy to get wrapped up in all the anxiety and pull the plug on my network before it even really got started. But I didn't. And I credit that to meditation. If I hadn't found meditation, the worry would have eventually knocked me off balance. Maybe it would have been my divorce. Maybe it would have been the Harriet Tubman video. Maybe it would have been losing one of my parents, or maybe it would have been getting caught up celebrating a so-called success. But thanks to meditation, I've been able to maintain that balance. A final example. When Barack Obama first ran for president, I worked extremely hard for him. I donated money, traveled the country, going to every place that would have me, made phone calls, and did everything I could to make sure the hip-hop community was going to come out and vote. I still vividly remember going to a party for his supporters on election night. After it became apparent he was really going to win, everyone around me started going crazy. People were doing double shots of tequila, dancing on tables, hugging each other, and crying. But as soon as the election was officially called, I was ready to go home. Not because I wasn't happy Obama won. I was. But because it's hard for me to get too excited about any kind of work that I do. Yes, I put in a tremendous amount of work for President Obama, but it's not like if Senator McCain had won, I would have fallen to the floor in a heaping sob. No, if McCain had won, you can believe the very next morning I would have rolled up my sleeves and gone to work trying to figure out a way to change his thinking on the issues that we disagreed on. In fact, I had even started working on a letter to him about several of those issues just in case he did win. Some people might see that approach as cold or opportunist, but it's not. It's simply about not becoming stuck on any one emotion. If you become very happy when you win, then it stands to reason that you're going to get very sad when you lose. And in life, both wins and losses are inevitable. The key is to treat them the same, and meditation conditions you to do that. Sometimes, when people see me about to leave a party early or turn down a round of shots when everyone else is getting turn up, they'll say, "Russell, don't you miss out on celebrating? Don't you want to enjoy life?" I have to tell them, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything because a constant contentment is what I'm looking for. I'm more interested in feeling balanced and peaceful all of the time, not just when something good is happening. That sense of equanimity I find in meditation is what makes me truly happy. Some friends have even asked me, if you get less emotional about situations when you meditate, does that make you feel less alive? And my answer is resounding, no. Today, sitting here, well into middle age, I can say I'm truly a happy person, which is a beautiful thing to be able to say. Am I eternally blissful? No. But do I find moments when I'm ecstatic about being alive? Yes. And the more I meditate, the more I have those moments. I'm talking about moments after I meditate where I feel extra alive. I even have some sessions that leave me feeling so blissful that they produce tears of joy. Forget about a morning coffee. Can you imagine how alive you feel when you start crying, when you start off your day crying tears of joy? It really is an amazing experience. And it is an experience that you can access to through meditation. Remember, you always control how you react to your thoughts, not the other way around. Don't ever forget that you always have the ability to make a change in how you perceive and react to the world. The power is always within your grasp. You just have to learn how to harness it. Chapter 14, Cultivating Creativity. The older we get, the more we tend to undervalue creativity. It's as if Creativity was a luxury we could afford when we were kids. But now that we're dealing with adult issues, there's no time to play in Fantasyland. Of course, just the opposite is true. The older we get, the more critical people become when we tap into our inherent creativity. Because that creativity is where all our good ideas come from. Look at it like this. Pretend that you're a farmer trying to pick between two fields to plant your new crop in. One field is filled with rocks, thorn bushes, and old branches, rabbit holes, all sorts of junk that is going to make your work very difficult. The other field has nothing but smooth, unspoiled soil. Which one are you going to plant your crops in? The second one, right? Well, your mind is the same as those fields. It's filled with a lot of junk. It's going to be very hard to plant a successful crop there. And even if something good does grow in there, it's going to be very difficult for you to find it. But when you can slow down and be still, your mind will be like the smooth soil of that second field. If properly cared for, it's going to be extremely fertile. As I wrote in Super Rich, stillness is the soil in which imagination is nourished, and our ideas can grow to incredible heights. The soil that can yield a crop that will sustain us for a lifetime. In short, a calm mind is a creative mind, and a creative mind is going to bring a lot of success into your life. I'll give you an example. In my many years in the entertainment industry, I've been around some amazing artists. In particular, some of the greatest rappers of all time. Now, rapping might not be an art form that people associate with calmness and stillness, but I can tell you that from LL Cool J to Chuck D to Biggie Smalls to Jay-Z, one trait that all those great artists share is an ability to operate out of stillness. There are a lot of rappers who worked as hard as those guys, but very few were able to dip into that well of creativity like they were. When it was time to get on the mic and spit a verse, those guys were able to shut out all the distractions and delve inside. And if you've never been inside a recording studio, trust me, there can be a ton of distractions. As a rule, rappers and rock stars like to be around a lot of people when they work. So it's not uncommon to have producers, engineers, managers, friends, groupies, journalists, maybe even a few drug dealers, all packed into the studio. It's a scene where it's easy for a rapper to become focused on everything but the music. Side note. Rick Rubin is not only one of the greatest producers alive, he's also one of my greatest friends. We founded Def Jam Recordings together and shared so many wonderful moments, helping bring hip hop to the world. One of Rick's greatest gifts is that he has an incredible ear. He simply can hear beauty and potential where others can't. The first time we heard a demo tape from Public Enemy, truthfully, I didn't think much of it. Sounds like some black punk rock stuff, I said. But right away, Rick told me, Russell, this is incredible. We have to sign them. And of course, Rick was right. And his ear hasn't been limited to hip hop. From Johnny Cash to Slayer to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Rich has been able to coax beautiful music from such a diverse group of artists. And I truly believe one of the main reasons he can connect with so many artists' voices as a producer is that he meditates. He's actually been doing it since he was a little kid. And his pediatrician recommended it to him. There are times when he moves away from the practice, but he always comes back to it. Toward the end of writing this book, I sent Rick an email asking him for his thoughts on meditation and how it's helped him. The very same day, I received this response from him. In meditation, we experience the silence from which all creativity springs, the act of creation, whether from a blank page to a poem, an empty space to a building, a thought to a song or film, starts with a void. For me, the more intimate a relationship we can build with that silent void, the more clearly the art can shine through and spring forth. Meditation is the vehicle to connect that silence. Rick Rubin, Malibu, 2013. Meditation is the vehicle to connect to that silence. End note. The great ones, however, never got lost in those distractions. Biggie in particular was legendary for his ability to stay focused. There could be all sorts of things going on, drinks being passed, blunts being rolled, people trying to holler at him about various projects, but he'd just sit in a chair with his eyes closed, seemingly oblivious to all the chaos around him. That was his way of connecting to the stillness inside of him, so that when it was time to get behind the microphone, he wasn't caught up in worrying about how his last record did or how this one might be received or once it was released. No. When it was time to make a song, he was always able to connect with both the music he was hearing in his headphones and the poetry that was filling up his heart. The same way today artists like Jay-Z or Lil Wayne are able to create entire songs without ever putting a word down on paper. Though being able to connect completely with the music, through being able to connect completely with the music, they're able to operate from that zone that the great ones are able to access. That may not sound like a big deal, but I've seen so many artists get sidetracked by those distractions. And when it's time for them to get in their recording booth and execute their craft, their mind is somewhere else. Sure, they're rapping along to the beat, but they're not connected to it. For example, I'm nowhere near as creative as Biggie was, or any of the rappers I just mentioned, but I do know this. When I was producing Run DMC's classic hits, like Rockbox and Jam Master Jay, I felt completely still. I might not have used the term back then, but it describes the state I was in. I often tell the story of lying on the floor of a recording studio in downtown Manhattan and listening to the final mix of Rockbox. I remember it being as if the entire world had stopped and the music was playing in slow motion. I could hear every subtle detail in that song, and the melody felt like it was alive. I was completely connected with what was coming through the speakers. It was magical. I wasn't thinking about anything that had led up to that moment. I didn't have any thoughts of what might happen after the group had released it. All I could hear was that beat, that guitar riff, and Run DMC's powerful vocals. I knew exactly what they needed to be fixed. I knew exactly what needed to be fixed and what shouldn't be touched. Outside of the birth of my children, I don't think I've ever been so happy, so completely engaged in the moment. Note, they might seem very different on the surface, but there's actually a strong connection between rapping and meditation. As I mentioned, Jay-Z has talked about meditating in his rhymes, as have Lil Wayne, T.I., and RZA. Several years ago, I was interviewed for Yoga Journal with RZA and Shaolin monk Xian Ming, who said he considered what the Wu-Tang Clan did on the mic to be actual meditation. When people dance and listen to hip hop, they are happy. This is also meditation. RZA, when he writes songs, uses philosophy to help other people. He's giving people meditation, explained Master Ming. Now, endnote. Now here's the thing. Most people assume that they can't control when those sorts of creative moments happen. Even when they do get a good idea, they'll say something like, "It just popped into my head," as if it was some sort of accident or lucky break. But there's nothing accidental or lucky about accessing the good ideas you have inside of you. Remember, those ideas are already there. You've just had trouble finding them because all the junk in your mind has been obscuring them. Meditation will help you clean out that junk and find those good ideas. How? Think of your mind as like one of those snow globes you used to play with as a kid. When you'd shake them up, the snow would be everywhere, and it would kind of obscure what was inside the globe. But when you just let the globe be still, eventually, all the snow would settle down to the bottom and you could clearly see what was inside it. When you use meditation to allow your mind to be still, it's the same thing. Eventually, all the distractions are going to settle down and you'll be able to see clearly what's inside of you. I was recently at an event, the David Lynch Foundation. Yes, they have a lot. And I heard the comedian Russell Brand say that he thinks meditation will help him get rich, or in this case, richer. He said, "I literally had an idea to drop into my brain while I was meditating, which I think is worth millions of dollars." I know exactly what Russell was talking about. I feel as though almost every time I meditate, I'm able to access a great idea for my TV and film companies or my new music label. And instead of being distracted, I'm able to look at new ideas through a clear prism and be extremely focused. In fact, the very idea of launching a TV and movie company came to me during meditation, and I'm sure that everyone who meditates has had a similar experience. Maybe not an idea worth millions of dollars, but certainly ideas that have real value, whether they're monetized or not. And just as your sense of being focused isn't limited to the 20 minutes you're in actual meditation, it's the same with creativity. Russell's idea might not have come to him while he was sitting in silence, but I'm sure he'd say that he feels more creative during his entire day since he started meditating. I certainly do, and I'm far from alone. There are so many incredible actors, musicians, directors, and comedians out there who all credit meditation with keeping their creative juices flowing. Judd Apatow, Sheryl Crow, Clint Eastwood, Jeff Garlin, Jeff Goldblum, Indy Ari, Hugh Jackman, Lenny Kravitz, George Lucas, David Lynch, Madonna, Paul McCartney, Eva Mendes, Rosie O'Donnell, Gwyneth Paltrow, Martin Scorsese, Jerry Seinfeld, Howard Stern, Forrest Whitaker. I went through 2 schools of acting, but I learned about acting from meditating and my martial arts teacher, Forrest Whitaker. These people all come from different backgrounds and create a diverse array of art, but meditation is a thread that ties them all together, that helps them hear that new song in their head, see the scene they want to film, or hear the joke they want to tell. You can tap into the same sort of creativity that Jerry Seinfeld feels when he comes up with a new joke, Lenny Kravitz when he writes a song, or Forrest Whitaker when he feels when he films a scene. All it takes is sitting in silence. Chapter 15, Getting Unstuck. One of the most unfortunate misconceptions people have about their lives is that they're stuck in certain situations. Whether it's a job, a relationship, a mood, or even a physical location, they feel as if there's nothing they can do to change it. But the fact is, no matter where you're from or what you've done, you're never stuck in anything unless you say you are. And meditation will help you see this. Meditation will help you lift your foot up out of the emotional quicksand you thought was pulling you down and let you start walking freely again. This is because when you sit in silence for 20 minutes twice a day, you'll begin to realize that parts of your life that you thought were unmovable, unfixable, or uncomfortable are in fact none of those things. They only have the power you assign them. When you let the noise distract you, it becomes very easy to move through life thinking, well, that's just the way I am. Or, hey, I'm not perfect, but nobody is, so people need to get off my back. But when you sit there in silence each day, it becomes harder and harder to ignore those parts of your environment that you don't like or make you uncomfortable, to the point where you'll realize that it's actually easier to change those parts of your life than it is to keep on perpetuating a negative cycle. So many of us, if we're being honest, get caught in these cycles where we do the same dumb shit over and over again, even though it never makes us happy. I've certainly felt trapped in many of them. I've never truly liked getting high, but there would be so many times where it would be 4 a.m. and I'd find myself smoking a woolly blunt. That's weed mixed with cocaine. I'd stagger home at 10 a.m. and wake up the next afternoon feeling terrible about what I'd done and vowing to clean up my life. But 2 nights later, there I'd be at 4 a.m. again, holding another blunt or sniffing another line. I used to find myself in the same sort of negative cycle with women. I chased them very hard, but often run away just as hard after I'd caught them. That was a very selfish attitude to have, and I hated that I used to make another person feel bad about herself simply because I couldn't control my desires. Today, while I'm still not so great when I'm single, but I'm much less selfish in my relationships. If I'm going to be 100% real, however, out of all the cycles I've found myself stuck in over the years, chasing women has been the hardest for me to break out of. I take a little solace in knowing it's said Lord Buddha's last problem was the flesh. I'm not free from neediness at all, but I have faith in the path that meditation has put me on. I have faith that even if I trip up from time to time, I can still get back on that right path. I don't feel like I'm trapped in any of those cycles anymore. For you, maybe it's not sex or drugs or drinking. Maybe it's eating sweets. Maybe it's buying clothes. Maybe it's obsessing over a loss or constantly worrying about the future. Whatever it is, you do not have to stay stuck in the same hurtful behavior. You can gain control over your life by regaining control of your mind through meditation. I can write it a million different ways, but all this book is about is you're taking back your life and doing whatever it is you imagine. The power that you'll gain through meditation will also help you get unstuck from whatever it is you perceive as holding you back from realizing your dreams. Do you find yourself working extremely hard yet also feel like you're spinning your wheels professionally? Like no matter how much effort you apply, you're not going anywhere? If so, the issue might be that you're not applying that effort in the space that is your true calling. Instead of listening to your dreams, you might be listening to the noise that the world is putting in your ear. Maybe it's the noise of your parents telling you, go to law school. even though in your heart you want to be a painter, or your uncle saying, you need to take this custodian position I can get you. It's a good, safe union job, even though you've always dreamed about opening a recording studio. Or maybe it's even the guys on your corner saying, come on, you need to help us sell these rocks. How else are you going to make money? Real money. Even though you have always wanted to go to law school. When you move through life distracted, it becomes easy for those external voices to drown the sound of your own dreams. But when you meditate, you will hear those dreams loud and clear and have the confidence to follow them wherever they might take you. Look at me. In the last year or so, I've basically turned my entire life upside down, physically and professionally. I'd lived in New York City for almost my entire life, and being a New Yorker had always seemed like a fundamental part of my identity. It's where my business was based. It's where my brothers live. It's where I'd always felt the most comfortable. But sitting in meditation in my New York City apartment every morning, I realized I needed a change. At first, I heard that message in a soft voice, but over the course of a couple of months, it became louder and louder until I couldn't ignore it anymore. And what that voice was telling me was that I needed to sell my homes in New York, shut down most of my offices, and move to Los Angeles. The main reason that voice was telling me to move was to be closer to my children, who live in LA. But I realized I also wanted to try something new professionally. I've always been intrigued by Hollywood and how it impacts our culture. So I decided to throw my hat into that ring and see what happened. And as I'm writing this, I've already experienced tremendous success working with people like Chris Conte and Jay Stein at All Def Digital on new film and television projects. I'm at a stage professionally where some people have one eye on retirement, but I feel as energized as I did 30 years ago. As I like to say, new shit keeps happening, so new shit keeps me young. But I also know a lot of people in similar situations who wouldn't be able to make that move, not because they don't want to try something new and shake up their lives a little bit, but because they feel like they've stopped evolving. If they're a 50-year-old lawyer who's worked in the same firm for the last 20 years in Boston, they can't conceive that they could also be a 51-year-old painter in Seattle or a restaurateur in New Orleans. In their minds, their identity is set, whether that identity is making them happy or not. It was the same with switching careers. I know a lot of people who are incredibly successful and would love to get a fresh start, but again, are entangled in the anxiety that accompanies considering a change. It's not that they couldn't support themselves financially through a transition period. A lot of these people are multimillionaires who could go years without earning a salary if they wanted to, but rather they are fearful about breaking the routine that they've developed over the years. So much of their identity is tied up in their role at their firm or their record label or their company that they chose to ignore that voice inside of them that tells them that they're no longer in love with what they're doing. But if they were to sit down and meditate every day, I know that in a relatively short period of time, that fear would begin to drift away. Instead of only seeing the perceived pitfalls and obstacles associated with change, their lens would clear up, and instead they would begin to see all the excitement and possibilities that they could be experiencing. When you sit in meditation every day, you are able to connect with what you are truly feeling about yourself. It puts you in touch with your true feelings in a very concrete way. Again, this is what gave me the freedom to move to LA. Even if it took me some time to realize I needed a change professionally, meditation helped me hear what my heart was saying about my personal life. And what it was saying very clearly was, you miss your daughters. This is another wonderful benefit of meditation. It forces you to address and fix the relationships that are the most important to you, which is not to suggest that my relationship with my daughters needed fixing. Despite being on opposite coasts most of the time, we were very close. We Skyped several times a day, talked on the phone, and visited together every few weeks. But as much as I tried, I knew all that Skyping and flying back and forth wasn't the answer. It wasn't the same as being able to pick them up from school or sit down at dinner with them and ask how their day was. When I was running around New York, taking meetings or attending events, I could push that fact out of my mind. When I was sitting there in meditation, there was no getting around it. But now that I pick up my daughters every morning and meditate with them from 6:45 to 7:05 before driving them to school, I know that I'm doing the right thing. I'm so grateful that I can feel the peace and happiness when we sit in silence together each morning. I'm not trying to suggest that I'm somehow a better father than most people. I personally know plenty of fathers who would like to be closer to their children, both physically and emotionally, but become anxious when they face the steps they would need to take to make it happen. Instead of moving to the sound of their heart, they feel stuck. But when I thought about getting close to my kids and their mother, I didn't get stuck. If anxiety floated into my mind, I was able to watch it float right back out again. The truth is that I love my kids and their mother, and thanks to meditation, I was able to stay focused on that truth instead of getting distracted by the fears that often accompany a change. When your mind is settled, the emotions that you have been ignoring, that you're afraid that you aren't ready to deal with, are going to rise up to the surface, whether it's emotions about your relationships, your job, your body, or anything you've been avoiding. The defense mechanism of fear that has always been keeping that feeling suppressed is going to drift away. It's as if when you finally let your guard down during meditation, it's going to let all your dreams come up to the surface. And once they're there, you'll realize just how easy it is to follow them instead of staying stuck in place. Chapter 16, Meditation over Medication. I want to talk a moment here about one of the most vicious cycles people get caught up in, which is substance abuse. Meditation is a powerful and effective way to deal with that abuse. Obviously, substances like cocaine, alcohol, and even cigarettes are physically addictive. But studies have shown that medication can help weaken that addiction. That meditation can help weaken that addiction. A recent study by professors at Texas Tech and the University of Oregon found that people who were taught meditation reported a significant decrease in their craving for cigarettes. The findings are so encouraging that the researchers believe that meditation can be used to break not just nicotine cravings, but all kinds of addiction. Because mindfulness meditation promotes personal control and has been shown to positively affect attention and an openness to internal and external experiences, we believe that meditation may be helpful for coping with symptoms of addiction. Professor Yi-Yuan Tang of Texas Tech University told Science Newsline. Those findings echo the results found by researchers at Yale, who also studied the effects of meditation on a group of nicotine addicts. Half the group was taught meditation, the other half was given the American Lung Association's gold standard treatment, which involves education on nicotine replacement therapy, including gum inhalers and prescription drugs like Zyban and Chantix. The study found that the group trained in meditation had much greater success in giving up cigarettes than the group who relied on nicotine gum or prescription drugs. In their conclusion, the researchers wrote, mindfulness training may confer benefits greater than those associated with current standard treatments for smoking cessation. But as anyone who's ever struggled with drugs or alcohol can tell you, it's not just a physical issue. The drugs might get you physically hooked, but the reason you turn to them in the first place is usually emotional. And this is where I feel meditation is particularly helpful in getting people unstuck. Or better yet, never even getting caught up in that cycle in the first place. I know that the urge that drives a lot of people to drinking and drugs is a desire to quiet the noise in their head. Maybe it's the noise of anxiety or of depression or insecurity or doubt or sadness or sensitivity or hurt. Whatever it is, or wherever it comes from, people want it gone, and drugs seem to be the easiest way to make that happen. Personally, I now see that when I used to get high, it was only because I wanted to drown out the noise. I was fortunate in that I never really felt depressed or sad, but I did hear the noise of anxiety. So I tried to drown it out with drugs, weed, cocaine, heroin, and angel dust, as I've alluded to. Yes, the guy who doesn't even want a bite of steak today, in no small part because what it might do to his body, used to get wet, the term for smoking dust. Without a second thought, I smoked so much dust back then that people used to talk openly about it in their songs. With Beastie Boys even rapping, "Our manager's crazy, he always smokes dust." Of course they also rhymed, "How did Kane feel cool with my man Rush Rush?" So I guess I was smoking a lot of coke by then too. The point is, back then, it seemed like not only myself, but a lot of the people I was running with were trying to quit their noise with drugs. Quiet their noise with drugs. which isn't surprising because I was hanging with a lot of creative types, rappers, producers, musicians, artists, and writers, who seemed particularly sensitive to the loud noise in their head. Interestingly, the one person in our crew who never got high was Rick Rubin, who, as I mentioned, was taught meditation as a kid. Not too long ago, an interviewer asked Rick how he managed to stay sober while working with so many artists who use drugs, and he had a very telling answer. Everyone has their own way of coping and dealing with the world, he told Purple magazine. I understand that the reason so many artists do drugs is that they're sensitive. I understand the need for self-medication, but I've done it with more meditation, but I've done it more with meditation and therapy. Meditation is a way of seeking. I'm into analyzing why things are the way they are. If something is painful, if you're sensitive or uncomfortable, if you feel like you're different, your choices are to examine this and figure it out, or to numb yourself and ignore it. Most people tend to numb themselves and ignore their problems to avoid how they feel. Most people don't seek therapeutic help and just look for ways to kill their pain. We live in a kill the pain society. TV kills the pain. Doctors prescribe drugs to kill the pain. Somehow, I got into tuning into how I feel and trying to understand it. Rick is a beautiful soul who believes in letting other people figure stuff out on their own. So he never really gave us a hard time about all the drugs we were doing. But it's clear to me in retrospect that even at a young age, he understood that meditation was a much better way to deal with your emotions than getting high. Side note, there is a really strong connection between the creativity musicians feel while working on new songs and meditation. Sting even said, yoga introduced me to a style of meditation. The only meditation I would have done before would be in the writing of songs. So if you're a singer, musician, songwriter, or really any creative type, looking for ways to get more in touch with your muse, I would urge you to start meditating. In the music world, a lot of people believe the only way to get into that zone is through drugs or alcohol, but meditation can take you there too. Yes, they came into the rap game, rhyming about partying and getting high. But in just a few years, the Beasties had awakened to the power of meditation. If you're not already familiar, check out some of the lyrics to their song, Bodhisattva Vow, a reworking of the pledge Buddhists take to try to obtain enlightenment. To me, it's the realest shit they ever wrote. End note. Thankfully, I figured that out too in time, as did, for that matter, the Beasties. Even back in 1912, they were writing songs like Namaste and Bodhisattva Vow with the lyrics, for the sake of all beings I seek, / the enlightened mind that I know I'll reach. The group, especially my beautiful friend Adam Yauch, who left us way too soon, did so much to raise consciousness in this country about the power of meditation. For creative types in particular, meditation can help you avoid so much of the suffering that inevitably comes from abusing drugs. Someone else who's experienced meditation's ability to break addiction cycles is the comedian, Russell Brand. Russell is a brilliant guy who has also been very courageous, not only in speaking about his addiction, but in working with the David Lynch Foundation to help other people struggling to turn their lives around through meditation. In an essay he wrote for the UK's Guardian, Russell talked about why drugs helped him deal with the anxiety and hurt he was carrying around with him. I cannot accurately convey to you the efficiency of heroin in neutralizing pain, he wrote. It transforms a tight white fist into a gentle brown wave. Unfortunately, the gentle wave never proves an easy one to ride, as Russell found out the hard way. At the height of his addiction, he was using heroin and smoking crack every day, culminating in his getting fired from MTV for showing up to work on September 12, 2011, dressed as Osama bin Laden. He was that far gone. Like me, Russell came to meditation through yoga, and like me as well, in meditation, he quickly found a way to escape the noise that had been occupying his head for so many years. He said during a recent speech at the David Lynch Foundation that he was a committed drug addict for a long time. He was really committed to that. Through meditation, he found this beautiful serenity and a selfless connection. He had a tendency to selfishness And he felt that exposed and he felt that exposed as a superficial and pointless perspective to have. He had a tendency to selfishness that he felt that exposed as a superficial and pointless perspective to have. He felt love for himself, but for everyone else too. Russell's story is another reminder that no matter how rich or famous or successful someone is, if they feel isolated from the world due to the noise in their head, they're never going to be happy. That's why if you see an actor or athlete with a drug problem and think, why would they throw away all that money and fame for drugs? The answer normally is because, as we've established, money and fame don't drown out the noise in their heads. These people might seem to have it all, but the noise keeps them from feeling separated from the world. The noise keeps them feeling separated from the world. Millions of fans might love them. Their peers might respect and be lining up to work with them. But because of the noise in their own head, they can't feel any of that love. Physically, they're always surrounded by other people, but emotionally, they're isolated. So they try to deal with that noise by using drugs and alcohol. I wish they knew, like Rick Rubin knows, like Russell Brand knows, like Alice Walker knows, and like Adam Yauch knew, that when you meditate, you're never going to feel isolated. Instead, you're always going to feel connected to the stillness in your heart and everyone else's. Chapter 17, Life Without Judgment. Another way that meditation will improve your life and relationship with the world is that it will make you less judgmental. At first glance, becoming less judgmental might not seem to be such an important change to make in our lives. We tend to treat being judgmental as one of those areas where we could always stand to improve, and not one that would ever really stand in the way of our sense of contentment or happiness. Yet in reality, being judgmental is often one of our biggest flaws as individuals, a trait that often represents one of the biggest barriers between us and the happiness that we seek. Think about how much time we waste every day being judgmental toward other people over things they have no control over. What am I talking about? Criticizing people for being short, bald people for losing their hair, and even old people for being wrinkled. Not to mention how we waste a tremendous amount of time judging people for the type of clothes that they wear, the music they listen to, how they style their hair, the brand of sneaker they wear, the type of car they drive, or the neighborhood they live in. And the list could go on and on. Ultimately, all those wasteful judgments are rooted in our own insecurities, right? We judge bald people because we're worried about losing our hair. We look down at people's cars because we're insecure about what we are driving ourselves. And we try to avoid old people because we're fearful of growing old and dying ourselves. Personally, I used to suffer very badly from these sorts of attitudes. I was quick to judge people over anything from downright silly stuff, like the fact that their sneakers didn't match their shirt, or whether or not someone was cool enough to be seen at the party with, or whether they were smart enough to go into business with. But after meditation helped me clear my lenses, I was able to see that the only reason I was so judgmental was because I was insecure about myself. I was anxious about my own choices and abilities, and I was projecting that insecurity onto the people I'd encountered in my life. I'll give you an example. Before I started meditating, I would get very anxious about the idea of doing live TV. I was filled with fear that as I opened my mouth, no matter what I was saying, people were going to judge me, and their verdict was going to be that I was an idiot. Remember, Def Comedy Jam, when I used to come out at the end of the show and say, God bless and good night. I used to get so filled with anxiety when it was time for me to go out, the producers would literally have to push me on stage just to say those 4 simple words, which is to say nothing of actually going on TV and talking about an issue. It got to the point where my assistants would turn down the TV interviews without even checking with me first because they knew I'd say no. I'd even try to get out of speaking at galas or award shows where I was the person being honored. The organizers of those parties probably thought I had an attitude or too much ego, but I was too anxious about the thought of standing up and speaking in front of a room full of people. After I started meditating, all that anxiety just drifted away. Sure, I'd still have moments where I'd be afraid of making a critical mistake on TV, but they would pass very quickly. Instead of stressing over how I'd be judged if I said the wrong thing, I'd just remind myself, who cares? and realized that I had nothing to worry about. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure people have seen me on TV and thought, what is Russell talking about? Or he's not making sense. But if that's how they feel, then that's how they feel. The important thing is that I'm not entangled in judging myself anymore, because I know that when I speak, I'm speaking from the heart. And for every person who judges me negatively, there are many more who hear me talking about gun violence, education reform, or the abuse of animals, and are positively affected by what I have to say. There's no doubt that meditation will clear off your lenses that have been dirtied by years and years of anxiety and allow you to see the best in yourself. But just as important, when you finally put down all the judgment you've been carrying around with you, instead of focusing on people's perceived weaknesses, you'll start to see all the good they're bringing to the table. This is so important. Imagine how much better your life would be if you moved through it only taking the good from people. Because usually, when we meet someone with negative energy or perspectives that we view as harmful, the negativity is what we hold on to. Their perceived negativity is how we come to define those people. But in the end, who does that hurt? Those people probably aren't changing their energy, but we are still stuck holding on to their negativity, often even long after they've left our lives and stopped thinking about us. When judgment is taken out of your heart, you can look past those people's negativity, which is probably just a reflection of their anxiety, and see whatever is good in them. Even if it seems like 90% of what they give the world is filled with anger and hurt. If you can focus on that loving 10% of them hidden behind the bluster, then you're going to get the best of that relationship. At the very least, you're not going to be burdened by their negativity. And you never know, but often by focusing on that loving 10%, you'll actually have a chance to change some of their more negative views. For instance, a lot of people wonder how I can have relationships with right-wing pundits like Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity. I certainly don't agree with their politics or their takes on society, but despite our differences, I try not to judge them. Instead, I try to take the positive from them, even if at times it might seem hard to find, and build on that. You see, personalities like Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity are always going to have a pulpit. They, or people very similar to them, are always going to be in a position to influence others and shape opinion. So rather than dismiss them out of hand, I try to find those small spaces where we at least agree to disagree, and then build on that. Because if I can have a dialogue and reach even just a few members of their audience with my message, instead of judging them and writing them all off as bigots or blowhards, then maybe I can affect some positive change, which is a lot healthier for myself and for society. But I'll be real. I'm only able to have a relationship with an O'Reilly or a Hannity because I'm not anxious about what people think of me. In the past, I would have been very nervous about how people on the left would have perceived my going on a show like O'Reilly's. Would they call me a sellout, an apologist, a fool? Now I'm not wrapping myself in knots worrying about the answers to those questions. Instead, I'm perfectly comfortable with them. I know exactly where my heart is at and exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm not going to engage any judgment that might be thrown my way. I've been talking about how the letting go of judgment has helped me personally, but I also want to stress how letting go of judgment can help us as a society. Or to take it even a step farther, how it can help heal mankind. Because if we look at the prejudices that hurt us collectively, that are holding us down all across the globe, they're all born out of judgment too. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religious intolerance, ageism, classism, they're all rooted in judgment. We already know the terrible price the victims of these judgments pay, but let's all consider how much it's hurting the people doing the judgment. Not to sound too sympathetic for people practicing racism or homophobia, but the truth is, carrying around that sort of judgment in your own heart is an incredible burden in life. If you're walking around worried about somebody else's sexuality or how they pray to God, you're living a fundamentally unhappy life. And I'm not talking about the over-the-top examples like the Ku Klux Klan, homophobes, or religious fundamentalists, but everyday folk like you and me who, despite what we might say publicly or even tell ourselves, still carry around judgment for people we perceive as different from ourselves. I've certainly been guilty of it in the past, making little jokes about people who might look, pray, or love differently than I did. It wasn't an impossible weight for me to carry, but it was enough to keep me from reaching my highest heights, my greatest potential. Side note, some 2,500 years ago, Lord Buddha came up with a very succinct way to describe the dangers of judgment. You will not be punished for your anger, he taught. You will be punished by your anger. It's still true today. Think about that the next time you feel yourself about to engage in racism, sexism, homophobia, or any type of intolerance. End note. But I promise you, meditation has helped cleanse almost all of that judgment from my heart. And the really incredible thing that I've learned is that when you move all that judgment out of your heart, it's not just like the space sits there empty. No, when you get rid of the judgment, what actually replaces it is compassion. And compassion is actually one of the most powerful tools you can use in life. Too often in our society, we view compassion and friendliness as weakness. Almost, we might say in hip hop, as some sucker shit. Nothing, however, could be farther from the truth. A truly compassionate person is as strong as a rock. A person who moves through life focused on friendship and empathy will actually be one of the hardest people you ever meet. As it says in the Yoga Sutras, Matriyadisu Balani, or the cultivation of friendliness creates inner strength. It's ironic, because we come to accept collectively that self-centered, egotistical person is the one who will get more out of life. It's true, they might get some material goods, or money, or sex, or power, but they will not get happiness. No, for self-centered, egotistical people, happiness actually proves very elusive. But for the compassionate and empathetic person, happiness is almost guaranteed. If you can let go of judgment and move through life only thinking of how you can relate to and help the people you meet, you're going to make them very happy. And their happiness will in turn bring you a type of joy and contentedness you probably haven't experienced before. Chapter 18, The Power of Compassion. If you haven't noticed, I like to mix it up a bit when it comes to religion. I think Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, and so many other faiths are all great. But at the end of the day, even though I love them all, I don't consider myself a follower of any of those things. Instead, whenever someone asks me what my religion I follow, I reply, my religion is compassion. To me, compassion is the ultimate expression of your highest self. When you realize that you are completely connected to everyone and everything on the planet, including the animals, this is when you have truly lived up to your full potential. The irony is, when I look around at a lot of so-called religious leaders today, I don't see a lot of compassion. I see a lot of judgment and even hatred, but not so much empathy. But the great prophets these people claim they follow, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Abraham, were all extremely compassionate individuals. Note, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. The Dalai Lama. End note. It's almost as if all these great faiths were built around the idea of compassion thousands of years ago. And since then, we've collectively drifted further and further away from that ideal. Meditation, thankfully, can help bring us back to it. Even though Buddhists in particular have been saying for thousands of years that meditation promotes compassion, modern studies are now proving it too. In the 1990s, the Dalai Lama began taking adepts, a term for Buddhist monks who had meditated for at least 10,000 hours, to Western scientists to see if there was a way to measure meditation's effect on compassion. So researchers at the University of Wisconsin conducted a study where they monitored the brainwaves of thousands of those monks and compared them to the brainwaves of a group of people who had just been taught how to meditate. Both the monks and the control group were asked to meditate on the concept of compassion and were monitored both while they were meditating and after they'd stopped. What the study found was that during the meditation, both the monks and the novice meditators experienced increased gamma brain waves, which the scientists associated with compassionate thoughts. But when they stopped meditating on compassion, the novices' gamma waves slowed down, while the monks kept growing stronger. To the researchers, this was proof that all those thousands of hours in meditation had actually trained those monks' brains to be more compassionate. Another fascinating study illustrating the link between meditation and compassion was recently conducted by researchers from Northeastern University and Harvard. In that study, a control group was taught meditation for several weeks. After they finished, they were each asked to go to a fake doctor's visit and observe to see if they would get up and offer their seat when a person, really an actor, in obvious pain and on crutches entered the waiting room and didn't have anywhere to sit down. The study found that only 15% of people who hadn't been taught meditation got up and offered their seat to the person on crutches. But out of the group that had been taught meditation, 50% of the people got up. That's 15% versus 50%. The results were so striking that in announcing the findings, Northeastern University released a statement saying, "These results appear to prove what the Buddhist theologians have long believed, that meditation is supposed to lead you to experience more compassion and love for all sentient beings." This is a really big deal. Again, if you were to make a list of aspects of yourself that you wanted to improve, compassion might not be at the top of the list, but it should be. That's because when you're compassionate, you're not only connected, but grateful as well. And a connected and grateful person is extremely attractive to the world. Think about it. Who's the most compassionate and grateful person that you know? Someone who, no matter what the situation, goes out of their way to try to make everyone around them feel good and comfortable. Someone who, no matter what you do for them, or even don't do, always goes out of their way to tell you that they appreciated what you did for them, or appreciated what you tried to do it. Appreciated that you tried to do it. Someone who's going to lend a helping hand, whether they've known you for 10 minutes or for 10 years. Maybe it's someone at your church, or on your block, or at your job. Whoever that person is in your life, I bet they're successful. They might not be rich, but I bet they're respected at what they do. I bet that if you ever had a business you wanted to start, or a great opportunity fell into your lap, they're one of the people you'd want to partner up with. I bet when their boss has to make a tough decision, that compassionate person is the one they turn to for advice and insight. I know that's how my office operates. I always look to surround myself with compassionate people. Simone Reyes, who's worked alongside me for over 25 years, is one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. When she's not helping me run my business and charities, she's an incredibly dedicated animal rights activist. She's a hardcore supporter of organizations like PETA, Mercy for Animals, Farm Sanctuary, and Animal Acres. Her passion for reminding people that we need to be compassionate toward animals inspires me every day. Michael Skolnick, who is my political director and runs my website, Global Grind, is also an incredibly compassionate individual. Perhaps as much as anyone I know today, Michael wakes up focused on how he can help alleviate other people's suffering. For Michael, that compassion often expresses itself in his work speaking out against gun violence. From his role in demanding justice for Trayvon Martin to his work in the streets of Queens, Michael has dedicated so much of his time to not only stopping future violence, but providing support to families who have suffered the unspeakable tragedy of losing a loved one to guns. Now, since I'm a hip-hop mogul, you probably figure that my inner circle consists of a bunch of lawyers, Ivy League BAs, and number guys. Nope. I can promise you that my utmost trusted advisors are an animal rights activist and a gun violence activist, not to mention a rabbi and a Muslim imam. Because in their compassion, I see incredible strength and integrity, values that mean much more to me as a boss than any degree on a wall or bottom line on a spreadsheet. One of the most inspiring examples of meditation's ability to increase compassion comes from an unlikely source, the US Army. Workers at a VA center in Menlo Park, California, recently hooked up with teachers at Stanford to put veterans through a course called Compassion Cultivation Training. The program helps vets coming back from places like Iraq and Afghanistan who are suffering from PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Specifically, a lot of those vets were stationed in areas where they've been taught to view civilians as potential threats. And when they returned home, they couldn't deactivate that way of thinking. Whereas before, they were viewing Iraqis or Afghanis as threats, now they were looking at their own neighbors, even their own wives and children that way. And it wasn't just recent vets. The VA works with a lot of soldiers who came back from the Vietnam War 35 years ago and are still dealing with these same situations, these same issues. In the program, the soldiers sit in meditation and focus on the phrase, "That person is just like me." One of the program's founders, Leah Wise of Stanford, tells NPR that the process allows vets to let go of a lot of fear and distrust they've been carrying around with them. It allows them to remember that, just like me, this person had ups and downs in his life or in his or her life. Just like me, this person's had goals and dreams. John Perry, a Vietnam vet, told NPR that meditating helped him come to terms with the pain and anxiety he'd been carrying around for decades. "It's pretty much a self-imposed prison," he said. "I didn't talk to anyone. No one would ask me any questions about the war. I wouldn't answer if they did. So isolation has been my problem for 40 years. One of the main reasons I'm so committed to the David Lynch Foundation is their dedication to using meditation to help veterans. They even committed $1 million towards starting a program called Operation Warrior Wellness that teaches transcendental meditation to returning vets. My great friend, Bob Roth, who runs the organization, has been teaching meditation to veterans for years, but recently told CNN's Soledad O'Brien, who also practices TM, it's just been in the past years where there's the understanding that post-traumatic stress disorder is a real epidemic that has no conventional traditional solution. Bob adds, the research has shown that meditation can promote a 50% reduction in the symptoms of PTSD. Obviously, the need to reconnect with compassion is most severe in vets, but the truth is that we all suffer from this sense of isolation, to a certain degree. We're born filled up with compassion, but the older we get, it's almost as if it starts slowly to leak out of us. Next time you're around little kids, notice how quickly they are to hug someone who's feeling sad, or how when one kid feels bad, they all start to feel bad. That sense of communal compassion is at our essence as humans. But the farther we move through life, the more we lose that connection. We begin to get so caught up in our own perceived suffering that we forget about what other people are going through too. Meditation brings us back to that childlike sense of connectedness. Never underestimate the impact increased compassion can have on your life. In fact, let the Dalai Lama have the final word on this topic. Compassion is the ultimate source of success in life, he writes. I believe that at every level of society, familial, tribal, national, and international, the key to a happier and more successful world is the growth of compassion. We do not need to become religious, nor do we need to believe in an ideology. All that is necessary is for each of us to develop our good human qualities. I try to treat whoever I meet as an old friend. This gives me a genuine feeling of happiness. It is the practice of compassion.